Twyford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a charter for corruption. Paula Bennett stands here in the House today defending a bill that will give her and Bill English, the Deputy Prime Minister, absolute carte blanche, unfettered powers to do any deal they like, with whomsoever they like, on any terms and conditions. It gives that minister the power to sell billions of dollars of land and public housing in this country to their mates, to overseas corporations, to PPP companies, to merchant bankers, property speculators, whoever, because they've defined community housing provider in the most open way possible. Anybody can rock up to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment and say, I want to register as a community housing provider, and then they are eligible to buy houses. There is nothing in the legislation to stop a PPP company from the United Kingdom to rock up and register as a community housing provider. There is no requirement for them to be non-profit. There is no requirement for them to have any track record in delivering social services or community housing. Anybody can rock up and say, I'm a community housing provider, I want to buy these state houses. The minister should be ashamed of herself. This bill clears away all of the normal legislative policy and constitutional safeguards that normally govern the process of privatisation or divestment. Paula Bennett and Bill English, on the basis of this bill, will be able to sit down with merchant bankers from the other side of the globe and do any kind of deal they want. And that is seriously a worry, given this government's track record in negotiating. Oh yes, they are masters of the universe. When they sit down with Warner Brothers, with Rio Tinto Zinc, with Sky City, oh, what a proud track record this government has got, selling out this country. Oh, and I forgot the TPPA. When they somehow overlooked the fact that 80% of citizens in this country wanted to protect the right of future governments in this country to stop non-resident foreigners from buying our houses, but no, they didn't think that was material, and they failed to safeguard the interests of this country and this country's citizens, to protect our land and our housing from being bought and sold by non-resident foreigners. So they've got a splendid track record in selling out the interests of this country, and it's even more of a concern when Transparency International recently dropped New Zealand down their perceptions of corruption index in light of the Aurovita affair, in light of the Saudi sheep scandal. This will be the next thing. This will be the next thing that will damage that perception of New Zealand as being a country that is free of corruption and has integrity and probity in the way that we conduct government and public affairs.
So back to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second reason that the Labor Party opposes this bill is that it represents the dismantling by John Key as the Prime Minister and Paula Bennett as the Minister, the dismantling of the social system of support that has given New Zealanders, young New Zealanders, a decent start in life and a roof over their heads, no matter how struggling mum and dad might be. It's a quintessential part of the Kiwi dream, sir, that no matter who you are, no matter what side of town you come from, no matter where you go to school or what mum and dad do for a living, that you get a decent start in life. And for decades, going back to the first Labor government, and in fact, going back to the first public housing under Prime Minister Dick Seddon, public housing has been the way that we ensure that every kid in this country gets a decent start in life. And it's not perfect. No one will stand in this House and argue that it is. But it was good enough in the 1960s for John Key and his mother to get the support of the taxpayer He got a decent start in life, and one of the ways that happened was that the taxpayers supported him through giving him and his mother a state house. But apparently now, under National Party rule in the 21st century, state house tenants, according to the Honourable Paula Bennett, are bludgers. They game the system, and they're fair game for that minister to vilify them and demonise them at every opportunity she gets. Well, sir, we don't stand for that. We stand for the principle that every New Zealander gets a fair go, and that it's the job of government to do the things collectively that we do together better than just allowing the market to reign. And what we object to about this bill is that it's enabling the dismantling of a critical element of social support in this country. And Bill English, who is the architect of that policy, Paula Bennett's just the mouthpiece. She's just actually a not very effective human face of this policy. Bill English is the architect. And this policy is he wants this to be his legacy to dismantle social housing, because he doesn't see there's any need for the government to either own housing or provide decent social housing for our most vulnerable citizens. He wants the private sector to do it, and only this week he was talking up the idea that international funds, the big private equity funds, companies like the retirement village companies, and he used Ryman and Somerset as his example, that they should get into running state housing and make a profit from it. He thinks they could make a really good profit from it. And my question for the people of New Zealand is, how can big private companies make a buck out off the back of the poorest 5% of the New Zealand community? The only way that they can do that is that the national government is willing to pour unlimited quantities of taxpayers' subsidies into their pockets. That's the only way it can work, and that's exactly what Bill English has in mind. This policy that the National Party has of privatising billions of dollars of land and housing that's been built up and paid for by generations of taxpayers and state house tenants, this policy is the most sordid element of the National Party's housing crisis, and it is one of the things that will come to, when people look back on John Key's time in office, the housing crisis that has emerged under this government will come to be seen as one of the hallmarks. And it's the government's failure to do anything about an out-of-control housing bubble in Auckland that has driven house prices up 25% last year. The average house price now $930,000. That incredible price pressure on housing in Auckland has driven up rents. The average rent, sir, went up $2,000 in Auckland last year. How can low-income working families find another $2,000? It's also the reason why we've seen a huge surge in families with children living in campgrounds, kids living their lives in cars, in garages. This is life under the National Party in the 21st century. This is what it means. And their total refusal to do anything meaningful to rein in that housing crisis sits alongside their dismantling of state housing in this country as acts of criminal negligence. Housing is one of the most fundamental human needs. If there's one thing that the government should do is make damn sure that people have access to secure, decent and affordable housing. But this government has been negligent in its omissions and also negligent in its policies, some of them which have actually made the housing crisis worse. And we've seen it in recent days in the media, on TV, radio and newspapers, that the heart-rending examples of families who are homeless and living in overcrowded and substandard conditions. This government is very good at rolling out press releases and photo stunts and meaningless cosmetic policies, but they will not do the obvious thing. They will not build more houses. It's the simple thing. We have a housing shortage, but this government refuses to build more houses. Instead, what does it do? It embarks on a massive privatisation program, selling the inadequate number of houses that it already owns instead of building new ones. Sir, this policy is the wrong policy at the wrong time. It will make matters worse for this country's poor and vulnerable families, and we oppose it.